In 1916, a little Italian girl named Teglia sat in the Ellis Island dining hall, stared at a bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar, and could not bring herself to eat it. She set it on the windowsill and let the birds have it. She had crossed an entire ocean to reach that table. Number 21 confused millions of new arrivals so badly that some tried to eat it whole, skin and all. Number 3 was built from scraps a butcher would have thrown in the gutter. These 30 foods fed people who landed in America with a single suitcase and almost nothing else. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 30 shocking foods Ellis Island immigrants actually ate. Number 30, white bread that looked like cake. For most people coming off those ships, bread meant something dark, dense, and heavy. Rye, pumpernickel, coarse peasant loaves you could practically knock on like a door. So when the dining hall handed them soft, pale, pillowy slices of American white bread, many immigrants genuinely believed they were being served cake. They bit in expecting sweetness and got nothing but air and salt. A loaf cost the government almost nothing to buy in bulk. For the immigrant, that first pale slice was the first lesson America taught them. Things here were not always what they appeared to be. Number 29, stewed prunes. Cheap, shelf-stable, and rumored to settle a stomach wrecked by 3 weeks in steerage, stewed prunes appeared on the Ellis Island menu almost daily. The kitchen would simmer dried plums in water and a little sugar until they swelled dark and glossy and soft. To a Sicilian farmer or a Russian peasant who had never seen one, a prune looked alarming, wrinkled, black, slick with syrup. Officials liked prunes because they were dirt cheap and aided digestion. Immigrants tolerated them because they had no choice. Today we feed prunes to people who need fiber. In 1910, they fed an entire wave of new Americans their first official meal. Number 28, cornmeal mush. Cheap to make and filling enough to anchor a stomach, cornmeal mush was a workhorse of the Ellis Island kitchen. The cooks boiled cornmeal in enormous vats until it thickened into a pale, quivering porridge, then slopped it onto plates in trembling gray mounds. The problem was the presentation. To immigrants who had never seen grits, polenta, or anything like it, the stuff looked less like food and more like something you would patch a wall with. It wobbled. It had no smell to speak of. Italians who knew polenta back home recognized it instantly and ate without complaint. Everyone else stared, but it sat heavy and warm in the belly and burned slow through a cold day of waiting in line. Beauty was never on the menu. Survival was. Number 27, oatmeal and brown sugar. This is the dish that little Oresti fed to the birds. To an American child, it was breakfast. To a child raised on bread and olive oil in a village near Naples, a bowl of gray oat porridge, crowned with melting brown sugar, was something alien and frankly disgusting. The texture alone, gluey and slick, was enough to turn a stomach already churning from the crossing. Many immigrants simply could not eat it. They pushed it away, hid it, or like Oresti, quietly set it on a windowsill for the pigeons. The kitchen kept serving it because oats were cheap and nourishing and easy to make for 1,000 people at once. The immigrants kept refusing it because the body remembers what home tasted like, and oatmeal was not it. Number 26, cold boiled eggs from the bucket. Feeding hundreds of people at a time meant cutting corners, and one of the corners was the egg. The kitchen would boil eggs by the dozen, by the 100, then dump them into great buckets to be handed out cold and rubbery hours later. There was protein in it. There was almost no pleasure in it. But a cold egg traveled well in a coat pocket, and a clever immigrant tucked 1 or 2 away for the long hours of inspection still to come. When you have crossed an ocean on hope and herring, a cold, hard-boiled egg is not a disappointment. It is insurance. Number 25, coffee with milk and sugar. The 1906 Dining Hall Report lists it plainly. Coffee with milk and sugar, bread and butter. For the immigrants, this simple cup was a genuine novelty. Many came from places where coffee was a rare luxury, or unknown entirely, where tea or chicory or plain hot water was the morning drink. The Americans served it strong, sweet, and softened with milk, and reactions were mixed. Some found it bitter and could not understand why anyone drank something so harsh on purpose. Others fell in love on the first sip. That sweet, milky, slightly burnt cup became, for a lot of new arrivals, the first thing about America they actually liked. Number 24, beef stew and boiled potatoes. The backbone of the Ellis Island dinner menu. Cheap cuts of beef simmered down with whatever was on hand until the meat surrendered, served alongside plain boiled potatoes and a slab of bread. After Teddy Roosevelt forced the place to clean up its act, this was the meal that showed up most reliably on the table. It was bland. It was brown. It was not seasoned the way a Hungarian or an Italian would have seasoned it. But it was hot, and there was meat in it. And for people who had eaten almost no meat for the entire voyage, a bowl of beef stew was close to a feast. Men who had not tasted beef in months ate it slowly, scraping the bowl, saving the bread to sop up that thin gray gravy. Number 23, baked beans. Boston. Baked beans, navy beans, slow-cooked in molasses and pork until they turned sweet and sticky and deep brown, were a strange revelation to the European palate. Most immigrants knew beans. Beans were old country survival food, plain and savory, cooked with salt and fat. But sweet beans? Beans cooked in molasses until they tasted almost like dessert? That made no sense to a Polish or Lithuanian newcomer. They poked at them suspiciously. Some hated the sweetness. Some, especially the hungry ones, decided that a sweet bean was still a bean and ate the whole plate. Baked beans were cheap, they kept, and they delivered protein at a fraction of the cost of meat, which is exactly why they kept appearing on the tray. Number 22, smoked and pickled herring. The 1906 menu makes a specific note, smoked or pickled herring for the Hebrews. And in 1911, Ellis Island built a dedicated kosher kitchen, a real act of accommodation for the enormous wave of Jewish immigrants fleeing the Russian Empire. They ate it with relish. Everyone else nearly fainted from the smell. Picture a dining hall packed with hundreds of exhausted travelers, and someone opens the herring. The strong-smelling, slick, glistening fish divided the room cleanly into the people weeping with homesickness and the people gagging into their sleeves. That single dish was a map of where everybody came from. Number 21, bananas. Here is the food that broke people's brains. The banana was tropical, exotic, and completely unknown to most Europeans arriving at Ellis Island. Carol Rapson told the Smithsonian that her own grandmother was handed a banana on arrival and had absolutely no idea what to do with it, because she had never seen one in her life. People bit into them whole, skin and all, and recoiled at the bitter, leathery peel. Others sniffed them, squeezed them, or refused them outright as some kind of trick. A kindly inspector, or a fellow immigrant who had been there a day longer, would sometimes demonstrate, peeling the things slowly to show the soft, sweet fruit hidden inside. For a great many new Americans, the banana was the very first food the New World handed them, and the New World did not come with instructions. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about Ellis Island food gets dark. In the early years, the men who held the food contract were corrupt to the bone. They skimmed money off the top, served rotten and spoiled food, and treated the immigrants like cattle to be processed as cheaply as possible. The dining hall was filthy. People got sick. The whole operation ran on graft. Then in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt visited the island himself, saw the conditions with his own eyes, and was disgusted enough to form a committee and force reform. By 1906, the menus had improved dramatically, accommodating Jewish dietary law and serving real, sufficient meals. It took a sitting president getting personally angry to make sure the poorest arrivals in America got fed something fit to eat. Remember that the next time someone tells you the system always worked. Number 20, ice cream. Cold, sweet, and utterly bewildering. Ellis Island sometimes served ice cream to immigrants, and the results were the stuff of legend. People who had never encountered frozen dairy did not know what they were holding. Stories passed down through families tell of immigrants spreading ice cream on their bread like butter. Because what else would you do with a cold, pale, spreadable substance? Others let it melt, confused, or recoiled from the shock of something so cold it hurt the teeth. But once they understood, ice cream became one of the most beloved discoveries of the entire arrival. A sweet, cold, impossible luxury handed to a person who days earlier had been crammed in the bottom of a ship. If America could conjure something like this, maybe the streets really were paved with possibility. Number 19, boiled mutton with brown gravy and peas. The July 1917 dinner menu featured boiled mutton, brown gravy, and peas. Mutton, the meat of an older sheep, was a deeply European dish, the meat of peasants and shepherds, gamey and strong and cheap. The Ellis Island cooks boiled it down soft and drowned it in a thin brown gravy with a scattering of peas for color. For British, Irish, and Greek arrivals, mutton was familiar comfort. For others, the strong barnyard flavor was off-putting. But the dish did its job. It was protein, it was filling, and it cost the kitchen very little. A boiled sheep could feed an enormous number of hungry people, and that was the entire challenge on Ellis Island, every single day. Number 18, beef and barley soup. When historians reconstruct the meals served to immigrants kept on the island for days or weeks, beef and barley soup turns up again and again. Tough beef and cheap barley simmered together for hours until the grains swelled fat and the broth turned rich and brown. It was the perfect institutional food. It stretched a little meat across a huge pot. It was nearly impossible to ruin, and it sat in the stomach for hours. For the immigrant who had to wait and wait and wait while officials decided their fate, a bowl of thick barley soup was both a meal and a small reassurance that they had not been forgotten. The barley was practically free. The beef was the worst cut available. Together they kept thousands of anxious people fed through the limbo of inspection. Number 17, tapioca pudding. Reconstructed Ellis Island meals often paired the soup with tapioca pudding for dessert. Those pale, translucent little pearls, suspended in sweet milk, were as strange to most immigrants as everything else on the tray. Tapioca comes from the cassava root, a plant from across the world, and the texture, slippery, gelatinous, vaguely alive, startled people who had never seen it. Some called it fish eyes. Some refused it on sight. But it was sweet, and it was gentle on a battered stomach, and the children especially came around to it once the strangeness wore off. The kitchen served it because it was cheap to make in vast quantities, and because even the harshest officials understood that a little sweetness could calm a frightened, exhausted crowd. Number 16, the $2 box lunch. Here is one of the cruelest little details of the whole Ellis Island story. Immigrants who passed inspection and were free to go still had to get from the island into the city, and many faced a long train journey to reach relatives in other states. So the food vendors on the island, knowing they had a captive audience of frightened people who could not speak the language, sold box lunches for $2. They packed it with bread, maybe some sausage or cheese, an apple, and sold it at a brutal markup. That is nearly $30 in today's money for a box lunch. The newcomers, terrified of starving on the train, paid. The captive economy of Ellis Island fleeced the poorest people in America at the exact moment they were most vulnerable. Number 15, crackers and milk. The 1906 report is specific. Crackers and milk for the women and children. While the men got stew and potatoes, women and children were often served the gentler, cheaper option of plain crackers softened in milk. A man in a white coat would also bring warm milk around to the children twice a day, morning and afternoon, lining the little ones up for their ration. For a mother who had carried a baby across an ocean on hope and very little else, that bowl of crackers and milk and that cup of warm milk for her child meant her family would make it through one more day. It was not much, but it was care, institutionalized and imperfect, and for a frightened mother far from home, care was everything. Number 17, meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. Second pattern break. Here is what nobody tells you about Ellis Island food. By the time these people sat down in that dining hall, most of them had already survived the worst meals of their lives. The journey itself, weeks in the bowels of a steamship in steerage class, was a culinary nightmare that the dining hall, for all its faults, vastly improved upon. Steerage passengers were often fed slop from communal kettles, food so bad that many immigrants survived the crossing almost entirely on the dry provisions they had packed themselves back home. So when we talk about strange American oatmeal and confusing bananas, remember the contrast. To a person who had eaten gruel ladled from a filthy shared pot for 3 weeks straight, a cold egg and a slice of white cake bread was practically the Ritz. Context is everything. These people were not spoiled. They were starving. Number 14, ship's hardtack and sea biscuit. Before they ever reached the island, immigrants survived the crossing on what they carried, and a staple of that survival was hardtack. They were dense, rock-hard biscuits of flour and water, baked until every trace of moisture was gone. The same survival bread that armies had carried for centuries. It would not spoil. It would not mold. It would survive weeks at the bottom of a trunk in a damp ship's hold. The catch was that you nearly broke your teeth on it. Immigrants soaked it in water, in coffee, and soup, just to soften it enough to chew. It was pure, dense calories, a brick of survival you could carry from a village in Poland, all the way to New York Harbor. Number 13, black bread from the old country. Nearly every immigrant trunk held bread from home. Dark, dense, sour rye and pumpernickel loaves, baked hard so they would last the journey, were carried across the Atlantic like a piece of the homeland itself. This was real bread to them. The bread of their mothers and grandmothers, nothing like the pale American fluff waiting on the other side. They rationed it carefully, a slice a day because once it was gone, there was no more of home to eat. A family would tear from the same loaf, and in that simple act, eat a memory. When the last crumb of old country bread was gone, that was the real moment of arrival. From then on, you ate America's bread, or you ate nothing. Number 12, hard sausage and salami from the trunk. Right alongside the black bread, the trunks of Italian, Polish, German, and Hungarian immigrants held cured meats. Hard salami, dry sausage, smoked links, all cured heavily enough to survive weeks without refrigeration. This was the treasure of the journey. While the everyday food was biscuit and bread, a thin slice of home-cured salami was a small celebration, doled out sparingly to keep spirits up across a brutal crossing. The salt and smoke that preserved it were the same techniques their families had used for generations, precisely so that meat could travel and last. A father would cut paper-thin slices to make it stretch, and a single hard sausage might be nursed across an entire ocean. When relatives in America smelled that old country salami unwrapped in a tenement kitchen weeks later, the whole building knew someone new had arrived. Number 11, a wheel of cheese wrapped in cloth. Hard-aged cheeses traveled too. A wedge of Parmesan, a hard sheep's milk cheese, a dense aged wheel wrapped in cloth and tucked deep in a trunk because hard cheese, like hard sausage, could survive the crossing where soft, fresh food could not. For Italian immigrants especially, a knob of grating cheese was almost sacred. Back home, it crowned every plate of pasta and beans, and they were not about to face the unknown new world without it. They guarded these wedges fiercely. A little grated over a bowl of plain macaroni could turn the cheapest, most desperate meal into something that tasted like dignity. Number 10. Garlic and dried herbs. Tucked into corners of the luggage, wrapped in scraps of cloth, came garlic bulbs and dried herbs. Oregano, bay, rosemary, sage, the seasonings of home. Immigrants knew somehow that the new country might have bread and meat, but it would not have the flavors that made food taste like their mother's table. So they carried flavor itself across the ocean. A few heads of garlic weigh almost nothing and last for months, and a braid of dried herbs could transform a pot of plain American beans into something that tasted like Calabria or Krakow. Settlement workers and American do-gooders actually looked down on immigrants for cooking with so much garlic, calling their food smelly and unrefined. The immigrants ignored them and kept on seasoning, and within 2 generations, the entire country was eating garlic bread and begging for the recipe. Third pattern break. Here is where the real story begins, because what happened after Ellis Island matters more than what happened on it. Most immigrants spent only a few hours on the island. Then they walked out into the Lower East Side of Manhattan, into the most crowded square mile on planet Earth, and they had to figure out how to eat on almost no money at all. The answer was the push cart. By 1900, thousands of open-air vendors crowded streets like Hester and Orchard, selling food off carts to a sea of immigrants who could not yet afford a stove or a shop. This was where immigrant food became American food, where the strange flavors from the trunks met the cheap abundance of America and produced something entirely new. The dining hall fed them for a day. The pushcart fed them for the rest of their lives. Number 9. Roasted chestnuts. On cold New York days, the pushcart that drew the longest lines was the chestnut roaster. Vendors roasted chestnuts over coals right there on the street, and the smell of them, sweet and smoky and warm, pulled homesick immigrants like a magnet. For Italians especially, roasted chestnuts were the taste of autumn back home, of village festivals and family. A paper cone of hot chestnuts cost just pennies. You could warm your frozen hands on them, then peel and eat them one by one. And for a few minutes, a tenement laborer freezing through a New York winter could close his eyes and be back in the hills of Italy. The chestnut vendor sold more than food. He sold a memory you could hold, hot and cheap, on the coldest, loneliest street corner in America. Number 8. Sweet potatoes from the pushcart. Alongside the chestnut man came the sweet potato vendor, roasting them over coals in his cart until the skins blackened and the insides went soft and sweet and steaming. A hot roasted sweet potato cost almost nothing and did double duty. You bought one as much to thaw your hands as to fill your stomach, slipping it into your coat pocket on the walk to the factory, then eating it once it had warmed you through. For the working poor of the Lower East Side, this was breakfast, lunch, and a hand warmer all in one copper coin. Sweet, filling, cheap, and warm. In a neighborhood where a cold tenement room had no heat and a factory shift started before dawn, a hot sweet potato from a street cart was one of the small daily mercies that kept people alive and moving. Number 7. Kosher dill pickles. The Lower East Side was once home to more than 80 pickle vendors, and the briny barrels were a fixture of every Jewish block. A pickle pulled dripping from a wooden barrel of garlic and dill and salt brine cost a single penny, which is why they called them penny pickles. For an immigrant child with one coin to their name, that sour, crunchy, garlicky pickle was a feast, a snack, an entire afternoon of joy. The pickle was perfect immigrant food. It was cheap beyond belief. It kept for months in the brine, and it added a wild burst of flavor to an otherwise plain meal of bread and potatoes. Whole families ate bread and a pickle and called it supper. To this day, a single pickle shop survives where 80 once stood, the last echo of a street that ran on brine and pennies. Number 6. Kneisches. Off the pushcarts came the niche, a pocket of dough wrapped around a filling of mashed potato or buckwheat groats called kasha, then baked or fried until golden. Dense, hot, and filling, a knish was the ultimate cheap immigrant lunch. It was bread and potato and a little fat, all rolled into one handheld brick of calories that could anchor a man through a 12-hour shift in a garment factory. Jewish vendors sold them by the thousands, and they cost just a few cents apiece. There was no plate, no fork, no sitting down. You bought it warm from the cart and ate it on your feet on the way to work, the steam rising off it in the cold air. The knish asked nothing of you but a couple of pennies and gave back warmth, fullness, and a taste of home in a single golden bite. Number 5. Schmaltz on bread. For Jewish immigrants, lard and butter were either forbidden or unaffordable, so they turned to poultry fat, and schmaltz became liquid gold. Families rendered the fat from a goose or a chicken, skimmed and saved every drop, and spread that rich golden schmaltz on a slice of bread with a little salt. That was a meal. Tenement families even raised geese in basements and courtyards specifically to harvest the fat, force-feeding the birds before slaughter the old country way. A slice of bread smeared with schmaltz and topped with dry beans, the crispy bits of skin left over from rendering, was pure comfort and pure survival, packing maximum calories into the cheapest possible package. When chicken operations grew more efficient, families switched to chicken fat, and after 1911, many switched again to a brand new product called Crisco. But nothing ever tasted like real schmaltz on fresh bread. 4th pattern break. Here is the part that food historians understand, and almost nobody else does. Feeding a family in a Lower East Side tenement was not cooking. It was warfare. After the rent was paid, the women of these families had almost nothing left. And yet, every single day, they had to put food on the table for husbands doing brutal physical labor and children who needed to grow. So they became geniuses of the cheap and the stretched. They haggled with pushcart vendors over a half cent. They knew which butcher sold bones for soup and which baker discounted yesterday's loaves. They could turn a handful of beans, a smuggled wedge of cheese, and a few pennies of vegetables into a meal that fed 6 people and tasted like love. These women never wrote cookbooks. They were too busy keeping everyone alive. But the food they invented out of desperation became the food America eats today. Number 4. Gefilte fish. On Fridays before the Sabbath, the Jewish pushcart fish markets on Hester and Norfolk Streets roared with business, and the dish at the center of it all was gefilte fish. Immigrant women would buy a cheap carp, debone it, grind the flesh with onion and egg, and a little matzo meal, form it into oval cakes, and poach them slowly in a broth made from the bones and skin until the whole thing set into a savory, gelatinous loaf. It was a miracle of thrift. Fish was expensive, so this technique stretched a single carp to feed an entire family by bulking the ground flesh with bread and egg. Nothing went to waste. The bones and skin became the broth became the aspic held the whole thing together. Born of poverty and the rules of keeping kosher, gefilte fish became one of the defining tastes of Jewish America. Number 3. Potato kugel and latkes. Here is the dish built from what the butcher threw away, married to the cheapest vegetable in America. Jewish immigrants grated potatoes, mixed them with egg, breadcrumbs, onion, and a generous spoonful of rendered goose or chicken fat. Then baked the mixture into a dense, crispy-edged casserole called kugel, or fried it into golden pancakes called latkes. The potato was the cheapest food in the New World, available everywhere for almost nothing, and the immigrants seized on it with brilliant creativity. A few potatoes, an egg, an onion, and a spoon of saved schmaltz produced a dish that was crispy, rich, deeply satisfying, and cost almost nothing to make. Old country technique met New World abundance and produced something perfect: grated potato bound with fat and fried until golden. Cheap, filling, glorious. To this day, families fight over whose grandmother's recipe was best. Number 2. Pasta and beans. Pasta e fagioli. While they established themselves in America, Italian immigrants lived on bread, simple bean and lentil soups, and plain, often meatless, pasta dishes, stretching every food budget to its absolute limit. The crown jewel of this survival cooking was pasta and beans. A handful of cheap dried pasta, a pot of even cheaper beans, a little garlic and olive oil and tomato, all simmered together into a thick, hearty, deeply satisfying bowl that cost pennies and fed a whole family. The beans gave it protein. The pasta gave it bulk. A scrape of that smuggled hard cheese over the top gave it soul. There was almost no meat because meat was a luxury, but nobody at the table felt cheated. This was the meal that built the Italian-American working class, one cheap, filling, magnificent bowl at a time. Today, people pay restaurant prices for it. Their great-grandmothers made it because it was all they had. Number 1. Bread. At the very top of this list is the simplest, most universal food of all: bread. For every immigrant group that passed through Ellis Island, no matter where they came from, bread was survival itself. The Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Poles, the Germans, the Greeks. Them arrived clutching loaves from home, and all of them survived on bread when there was nothing else. Day-old bread bought cheap from the baker. A heel of bread dipped in coffee for breakfast. Bread with a smear of schmaltz, bread with a scrape of olive oil, bread crumbled into soup to make it stretch, bread softened in milk for a child. A loaf cost just a few cents, and it was the one thing standing between a family and hunger on the nights when the money ran out before the week did. These people arrived in America with almost nothing in their pockets and an entire world of recipes in their heads. And bread, plain and humble and eternal, was the foundation they built the whole country on. Here is my challenge: make one of these this week. Just one. The pasta and beans, the latkes, the schmaltz on bread, the chestnuts roasted in your own oven. Then sit down and taste what survival actually tasted like. Because these were not just foods. They were the meals that fed the great-grandparents of nearly half of all Americans alive today. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the gefilte fish gets more love than the knishes, and I want to know if your own family carried a loaf, a sausage, or a wedge of cheese across that same ocean. Because somewhere in your kitchen, a recipe is still waiting to be remembered.